Okay, so we're just going to take you back to the UK in Windsor Castle in St George's Hall, where the guests have arrived, including the Queen Camilla.
Windsor Castle inside St George's Hall was bathed in the brilliant glow of candlelight and the subtle clinking of premium crystal glasses when a true tempest swept through the British royal family's sanctity, pushing it to the absolute brink of total collapse before the eyes of the entire world. This was a top-secret reception reserved exclusively for the most powerful international ambassadors and the sharpest minds holding global destiny in their hands. Every single guest crossing the historic stone archway had to undergo rigorous security checks by the elite royal guard because their presence served to reaffirm their deep bond with the British throne, and any minor slip-up or out-of-line gesture from a royal family member could instantly become a dangerous fuse, detonating the family's reputation before the global public. Yet in that very suffocating atmosphere, hidden behind a thick red velvet curtain in a dark corner of the west corridor, stood Queen Camilla, her eyes darting around restlessly as her hand tightly gripped a feather fan. A long-standing envy toward the official heirs had driven Camilla out of her mind, as she could not stomach seeing her two biological stepchildren from her previous marriage, especially Laura Lopes, consistently treated by the old British nobility as mere hangers on the absolute fringes of the royal spotlight. Tonight, Camilla decided to play a high-stakes gamble, secretly smuggling her biological daughter into the banquet hall to force the International Diplomatic Corps to recognize her own bloodline once and for all. Despite stern warnings from King Charles's personal aides that the guest list was completely closed, Camilla utilized the supreme prerogative of the woman beside the throne to act, ordering a group of loyal guards to open a side door behind the garden, which was a shortcut leading straight into the castle's back hall. Stepping out from the dark shadows of a sedan, Laura Lopes, dressed in a deep purple gown, slunk through the side entrance, where Camilla stood waiting, immediately grabbing her daughter by the shoulders, smoothing out the creases of her dress, and flashing the triumphant smile of someone who had just pulled off an illicit break-in. As mother and daughter walked side by side into the magnificent main hall to the elegant sound of violin music, Laura Lopes' presence immediately stuck out like a sore thumb, because even though the banquet hall was crowded, the sight of someone not on the official diplomatic roster casually walking beside the Queen caused veteran service staff to whisper behind their silver trays. Camilla ignored them entirely, leading Laura by the hand straight toward the tables of European ambassadors, repeatedly interrupting high-level conversations to introduce her daughter, as self-satisfaction completely blinded her into believing that with her title of Queen, no one, not even King Charles, would dare humiliate her in front of international guests, entirely unaware that this fuse of selfish maternal love would soon erupt into a catastrophic disgrace. The perfect plan that Queen Camilla had personally orchestrated began to veer disastrously off course, as arrogance completely eclipsed the reason of the greedy Laura Lopes, who had never been molded by the rigorous codes of conduct and the emotional restraint lessons of true royal blood. Presuming upon her mother's supreme position next to the king, Laura treated Windsor Castle tonight like a lavish nightclub reserved for her own extravagance, moving repeatedly toward the central bar where expensive champagne and aged spirits were displayed to serve the distinguished guests. Without a shred of the modesty or politeness expected of an uninvited guest, Laura demanded the bartenders continually refill her glasses with hard liquor, gulping them down rudely right before the astonished eyes of the palace staff. In less than an hour, the heavy alcohol began to seep into her bloodstream, igniting a reckless arrogance and wiping away Laura Lopes' last shred of self-control as her steps grew unsteady and her eyes bloodshot from drink. She marched straight into the center of the main hall, where King Charles was conversing with the United States ambassador and other heads of state, and instead of maintaining a safe distance to conceal her unauthorized presence, Laura intentionally swaggered about, the heavy thud of her heels striking the wooden floor completely out of tune with the soft violin music. She began to laugh out loud, a piercing, vulgar laughter echoing through the solemn space, causing nearby diplomatic conversations to instantly freeze in utter bewilderment. The peak of the deep humiliation began when Laura Lopes stood blocking the portrait of the late Queen Elizabeth, clutching a crystal glass loosely in her hand, and loudly criticized the night's diplomatic protocols as an outdated farce and ridiculous rules of a dead era. Laura's slurred, drunken voice carried far, ringing in the ears of nearby aristocratic guests, and not stopping at that audacity, when a veteran steward approached with a silver tray intending to gently invite her to move to the side lobby to rest, Laura immediately flew into a savage rage. She lashed out with her arm violently, sending her crystal glass full of red wine splashing directly onto the poor staff member's gold-embroidered uniform, the crimson liquid staining it like an indelible mark of shame right in the heart of Windsor Castle. In front of hundreds of prominent international diplomats, Laura Lopes began screaming loudly, unleashing indecent remarks and vulgar insults at the server, shrieking that the palace staff were nothing but lowly servants who had absolutely no right to touch or order around the daughter of the reigning Queen of England. The crude, low-class street language spewing from the mouth of an illegal intruder completely tore apart the elegance and solemnity of the state diplomatic gala. Foreign ambassadors immediately stopped mid-sip, their faces slackening in absolute shock before quickly turning into overt contempt and disgust as they began whispering to one another, directing sarcastic glances straight toward the throne where the honor of the entire monarchy was being dragged through the mud by the uncultured behavior of the Queen's stepdaughter. Camilla stood not far away, witnessing the horrific spectacle from start to finish as the powerful woman's face drained of color, instantly turning from flushed to deathly pale, and then turning bright red with ultimate humiliation and helplessness. Her diamond-ringed hands trembled so violently that she could not hold her feather fan steady, while cold sweat broke out along her spine, soaking her expensive silk gown. Camilla felt a suffocating weight pressing down on her chest as she realized she was completely powerless, knowing she could not rush over to gag her daughter in front of a forest of indirect lenses and the scrutinizing eyes of world leaders. Yet, she could not look away while Laura was digging a grave for both of their reputations. The nervous tension escalated to the point where Camilla could only stand frozen in place, her breathing rapid, helplessly watching the scandal of the century unfold openly before the global public. Laura Lopes' humiliating fall was no longer a matter of internal friction behind closed doors. It had turned into a full-blown diplomatic disaster right in the middle of the magnificent Windsor banquet hall, as the dissolute lifestyle, the arrogant abuse of power, and the addictive habits of Camilla's biological daughter exposed the true nature of those who desperately wormed their way into high society without a shred of self-respect or basic manners. The honor of the British monarchy and the face of the nation before its international peers all was smashed to pieces in a moment of sheer embarrassment by Laura's recklessness and Camilla's irresponsible indulgence, setting the stage for an unprecedented intervention that would change the power dynamics inside the palace forever. On the complete opposite side of St. George's Hall, standing entirely apart from the chaotic disgrace caused by Camilla and her daughter Princess Catherine, observed the entire progression of events with an ominous and chilling silence. She stood as straight as an ancient pine tree in winter, her hands lightly and elegantly clasped in front of her premium royal blue silk evening gown, a minimalist design that nonetheless radiated the absolute authority of a woman born to protect the monarchy at all costs. Not a single trace of panic or vulgar anger appeared on Catherine's calm face, but her eyes were as sharp as razor blades, locked firmly onto every unsteady movement and crude insult made by the drunken Laura Lopes. Catherine was deeply aware that the honor and sanctity of an entire family built on the blood and sacrifices of generations was being sordidly defiled before international leaders due to Camilla's irresponsible maternal greed. Catherine knew that if she continued to stand by and watch, the royal family's helplessness would be dissected by the international media and the nation's face would sink completely into the mire of global ridicule. Without waiting for an official order from King Charles or the slow intervention of palace aides, her sheer capability and supreme loyalty to the throne compelled Catherine to act immediately. She began to stride across the magnificent banquet hall, heading straight toward the central bar where Laura Lopes was still screaming at the top of her lungs at the terrified waiter. Every single step Catherine took was steady and graceful, yet carried an invisible psychological pressure that caused the surrounding atmosphere to drop instantly to freezing point. Every gaze in the hall, from foreign ambassadors to British aristocratic ladies, immediately locked onto the majestic silhouette of the Princess of Wales. The innate poise evident in her demeanor caused the crowd to automatically part to both sides, clearing a path for her as a natural sign of reverence toward true authority. Catherine deliberately advanced, standing tall and imposing directly in front of Laura Lopes just as she was swinging her arm to smash another crystal glass onto the floor. The physical distance between the two women was less than a meter, creating a brutal and striking contrast for everyone watching. On one side was the Queen's biological stepdaughter, drunken, flushed, and reeking of low-class alcohol, while on the other was the future Queen, elegant, sharp, and embodying the supreme authority of court discipline. In a low, cold, and exceptionally decisive voice, Catherine directly cut off Laura's shouting without raising her own voice to create another loud scandal, but every word she uttered carried the weight of a supreme verdict, echoing clearly through the newly silenced banquet hall. Catherine looked straight into Laura's bloodshot eyes and issued an absolute demand, forcing her to immediately cease her uncultured behavior and leave the hall this very instant to preserve what little remained of the family's dignity. Catherine's words acted like a blast of icy water poured directly onto the drunkard's arrogance, causing Laura Lopes to freeze instantly as the aggression on her face was momentarily replaced by sheer bewilderment in the face of the princess's overwhelming aura. Catherine asserted with ironclad composure that Windsor Castle was a sacred sanctuary of protocol and national honor, with absolutely no room for low-class behavior or disrespect toward those dedicated to serving the crown. Every word she spoke was not just a warning to Laura, but a fierce and direct message sent to the powerful woman standing paralyzed behind her, proving that the honor of this family was not something anyone could trample upon to satisfy their own selfishness. Catherine's timely, calm, and courageous intervention immediately halted a diplomatic scandal that threatened to spiral into a global media crisis, because she chose to confront it head-on, refusing to resort to violence or petty insults, instead using the supreme authority of elegance and strict discipline to crush the sordid chaos brought by Camilla and her daughter. At this exact moment, Catherine was not just acting as a daughter-in-law within the family, she stood there as a true future queen and the ultimate defender of the throne's sanctity against all storms. Her decisive intervention drew an uncompromising line in the sand, escalating the palace conflict to a climactic new level, ready for a do-or-die battle right in the middle of Windsor's magnificent banquet hall. The fierce, cold warning from Princess Catherine was like a spark thrown directly into the powder keg waiting to explode inside Queen Camilla. Witnessing her biological daughter being publicly humiliated and ordered to pack her bags by her daughter-in-law in front of hundreds of aristocratic eyes, Camilla instantly lost all the fake elegance she had painstakingly constructed for decades. Without a shred of respect, Camilla lunged straight toward Catherine at an astonishing speed, her face contorted with ferocious wrinkles and her eyes rolling back in sheer fury and hatred. The blind instinct to protect her child and the selfish pride of an ambitious mother completely blinded the last shred of reason in the woman currently bearing the title of Queen of England. She used her entire body to block Laura Lopes, obstinately shielding her daughter, who stood trembling, her face flushed red and reeking of low-class alcohol. Camilla glared at Catherine, her lips tight, before spitting out venomous words, turning the solemn space of St. George's Hall into a bloody battlefield of familial intrigue. She deliberately lowered her voice, yet every word uttered carried brutal threats, publicly slandering Catherine as a jealous, petty person who was intentionally orchestrating a cheap drama to humiliate the Queen's personal family and undermine her prestige in front of international guests. Camilla venomously whispered, demanding to know who Catherine thought she was to issue orders in this castle, asserting that Laura was her daughter and no one had the right to touch her. Facing the frenzy of her powerful stepmother, Princess Catherine did not back down even a single inch, remaining standing tall, her shoulders proudly motionless and her gaze cold as ice, piercing straight through Camilla's aggression. Catherine did not deign to bicker with low-class insults, but countered with the iron authority of someone upholding family discipline. In a resonant, crystal-clear, and exceptionally calm voice, Catherine pointed to the shattered crystal glass on the floor, the crimson wine stains spread across the poor server's coat, and directed Camilla's gaze toward the international ambassadors standing frozen in shock all around them. Catherine asserted that personal maternal affection must never be allowed to trample over the face and sanctity of an entire nation. The face-to-face, highly emotional, and intensely strained clash between the two leading women of the palace unfolded in a bone-chilling silence, as the violins on the high platform had long fallen silent, replaced instead by the horrified and contemptuous whispers of the global diplomatic corps, who had never witnessed a spectacle so humiliating in the history of Windsor. The two most powerful women openly battling, tearing away their sophisticated facades to expose a petty low-class family feud before the world. Camilla continuously used her title as queen to force Catherine to step back and kneel to apologize to Laura, but her obstinacy and aggression only made her desperation and lack of sound argument clearer before a princess who always weaponized royal sanctity as her ultimate tool. As the conflict between Camilla and Catherine reached its absolute peak of chaos, the banquet hall of Windsor Castle completely devolved into an international farce. Embarrassment and horror were written all over the faces of the foreign ambassadors who stood in small groups witnessing the face of a monarchy being ripped apart by a petty family feud. Just as Queen Camilla believed she could use her supreme status as the wife beside the throne to force Catherine into submission and silence her forever, a majestic and imposing figure slowly stepped out from behind the red velvet curtain of the back hall. King Charles had been standing there for a long time, witnessing the entire sordid drama of his wife and stepdaughter from start to finish, with an expressionless, stony face and eyes filled with utter disappointment and profound rage. The sudden appearance of the king instantly cast the entire room into absolute silence, creating an invisible psychological pressure that weighed heavily on every breath of those present. Camilla turned around quickly, her eyes flashing with a desperate ray of hope, believing her husband would finally speak out to defend the honor of his reigning wife and stepdaughter against Catherine's fierce onslaught. She took a swift step forward, her lips trembling as she prepared to beg for the king's validation and protection, but King Charles did not grant Camilla even a single glance. Utter indifference and estrangement were written across his face as his cold gaze swept past his wife, landing instead on the capable and resolute face of Catherine. In that decisive moment, the king made a ruthless choice, placing the discipline of the monarchy above personal spousal affection, setting the stage for a brutal turning point where the wicked would lose everything. Barakat Adalik EL&JHAN si Kalagas Bab Tarakir Untuk Bab 3, Yang Berfokus Pada Penguzaran Paksa Laura dan Camilla, Hukuman Serta Konsequensi Yang Marika Terima, Hingga Kemenangan Mutlak Princess Catherine. Sesuai Instruksi Anda. Narasi Ini Darankang Sepadat Mungkin Memenuhi Target Total, Disajikan Tanpa Jita Waktu, Tanpa Subbagian. Dichilis Penadalam versi Baisa Inggris Terlebih Dahulu, Lalu Langsung Diikuti Ola versi Terjemahan Baisa Indonesia. A and B. Narasi voiceover. Bab 3. Version. English. In that breathtakingly decisive moment inside the magnificent St. George's Hall, King Charles executed a masterful stroke of absolute authority that left the entire international banquet hall completely stunned and paralyzed. He slowly but unforgettably raised his right hand, delivering a cold, sharp nod directed straight at the elite royal security forces stationed heavily at the corners of the hall. The king's action-based command was crystal clear, powerful, and entirely irreversible, instantly causing four burly security officers to step forward with heavy rhythmic steps. Completely ignoring the supreme status of the reigning queen, they advanced straight toward Camilla and her daughter, separating the terrified woman from Laura Lopes with a terrifying and mechanical resoluteness. To Camilla's absolute bewilderment, shock, and profound humiliation, the security personnel quietly yet decisively escorted and marched her alongside her daughter Laura Lopes out of the magnificent hall immediately. Camilla tried desperately to turn her head back, her eyes rapidly pooling with tears as she looked at her husband to beg for a single shred of clemency, but King Charles turned his back, completely abandoning his wife to her public disgrace. This public expulsion was a fatal and catastrophic blow, dragging Camilla and Laura down into the deepest mire of ignominy as they were marched directly between two long rows of prominent international guests under burning glances of contempt, disgust, and the gleeful whispers of those Camilla had just tried to exploit for personal gain. This brutal turning point sealed the ultimate fate of the palace battle, proving that blind maternal selfishness had utterly failed against the strict and unyielding justice of the court. Immediately after the humiliating figures of Camilla and Laura Lopes disappeared behind the grand golden doors of the banquet hall, King Charles made a move that cemented the absolute victory of the righteous side once and for all. He slowly strode across the magnificent banquet hall, walking straight toward where Princess Catherine stood proudly in front of the entire international diplomatic corps. The king publicly stood right by Catherine's side, his stern expression softening significantly as he gave her a proud, gentle, and respectful nod. This highly public gesture was an absolute implicit endorsement from the king of Catherine's immense capability, loyalty, and supreme authority, silently but powerfully reaffirming to the world that she was the one truly worthy of representing the monarchy's honor. Vindication and final justice were ruthlessly established for those who had triggered the sordid scandal, as a fitting verdict was immediately executed for each character following this historic confrontation, leaving absolutely no room for reconciliation or secret negotiation. Laura Lopes suffered the heaviest possible consequences for her sudden downfall and insolence, being completely banished and permanently barred from all high society events and British royal family castles. Her name was wiped clean from all future guest lists, forcing her to withdraw entirely from social circles and accept a life of reclusive, humiliating isolation, completely shunned and forgotten by the London aristocracy. Queen Camilla's punishment was manifold more brutal and deeply humiliating, as her covert power was drastically stripped down to nearly zero within the palace. She was stripped of all privileges to freely enter and leave confidential spaces within the royal residences, and from now on, every single move she made would be under the strict and unyielding surveillance of a king's security detail. The relationship between King Charles and Camilla officially plunged into an atmosphere of absolute coldness and total estrangement, turning the once greedy woman into a lonely shadow, effectively confined within the massive indifference of her husband inside her own quarters for the rest of her life. Princess Catherine emerged as the radiant and undisputed victor from this stormy night, earning profound respect and differential bows from palace officials as well as international diplomats. Thanks to her unmatched composure and decisiveness, Catherine's public image was solidified more firmly than ever before, securing her status as a poised, sharp future queen who always knows exactly how to stand firm to protect her family's sanctity against the most ruthless onslaughts. The wicked paid a heavy price with everything they possessed, suffering public exposure and total humiliation, restoring the rightful discipline to the court of Windsor. The breathtaking battle at Windsor Castle closed with the complete and humiliating downfall of Camilla and her daughter, but its echoes remain a fierce warning to anyone who dares use personal greed to trample on the honor of the monarchy. After this bitter punishment and ruthless isolation, will Queen Camilla truly accept her tragic fate as a lonely shadow in the palace, or is this ambitious woman quietly mapping out a more sophisticated revenge plan to reclaim what she lost? Is King Charles's cold turn of the back tonight the definitive end to the decades-long turbulent and highly controversial romance between him and Camilla? This battle has named Princess Catherine the ultimate victor, but will the iron authority she just asserted bring her peace, or will it turn her into the primary target for the next covert conspiracies? How do you feel after witnessing the humiliating exposure of Laura Lopes right in the middle of the state banquet hall? Is it utter vindication as justice is served, or outrage at the bottomless greed of a queen? Leave your comments below to share your thoughts on the future of the British throne after this stormy night. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification button so you don't miss the next dramatic hidden angles and royal behind-the-scenes secrets about to be revealed. Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen.